We are very quickly approaching the fantasy playoffs, which means your chips are either all in or all out at this point. So let's see what we can do to help those playoff pushes with Week 13 IDP rankings. Welcome back to the IDP Plus podcast. On this show, I'm your host, Axton Harding. You can find me on Twitter at AxmanIDP. Feel free to reach out to me with any kind of questions you might have or you might want an outside opinion. I tend to elaborate a lot on my thoughts as to what kind of situation you might be in, and perhaps I can add a little context that maybe you weren't considering before and help you make those decisions. Also, feel free to throw any questions in the comments as well. But for this show, we've got IDP rankings. We go ahead and rank the top 12 defensive linemen, linebackers, and defensive backs each and every week. So now we're getting into Week 13, 2 weeks of the fantasy football regular season left before we get down to playoff time. So hopefully we can make a difference here and help you guys end the season with a couple extra wins before we get to crunch time. So that being said, let's not waste too much more time. Let's get right into the big men in the trenches and start with our top 12 defensive linemen. So let's go 1 through 12, and then we'll kind of go hit on each one in their matchups individually. So let's talk about from 1 through 12, we've got Myles Garrett, Maxx Crosby, Will Anderson, TJ Watt, Aidan Hutchinson, Andrew Van Ginkel, Brian Burns, Nik Bonitto, Jared Verse, Montez Sweat, Danielle Hunter, and Tuli Tuipulotu. So back up to the top, talk about Myles Garrett. Has been on an absolute tear as of late. Myles Garrett of the Cleveland Browns plays the San Francisco 49ers this week. He has compiled 13 tackles, 8 sacks, 11 quarterback hits, or 11 tackles for loss, 12 quarterback hits, and 2 forced fumbles, all in the last 3 weeks. Again, he is just on an absolute tear as of late. So it really doesn't even matter the matchup, but we're going to go ahead and talk about it anyways. Where are we? The Cleveland Browns are in a rather... Actually, let's filter to our right data here. Sorry, guys. I had it filtered to defensive backs last night. All right, here we go. The Cleveland Browns. Still, bottom end matchup, but Myles Garrett has surpassed the odds over the last handful of weeks, month or more. But let's talk about specifics to this matchup. We're looking at about 7 tackles per game on average given up by the San Francisco 49ers to opposing defensive ends over the last 3 weeks, and a third of a sack on average per game. Myles Garrett, again, is just one of those guys, though, that's just going to be able to beat about any offensive lineman off the rip, and there's always potential for one or multiple sacks in any given game. It doesn't matter the strength of the offensive line or what they've given up statistically over the last handful of weeks. Myles Garrett is going to defeat the odds time and time again, as he has shown. This guy is on a mission. It is clear and apparent that he is working towards something and trying to make things happen, and he is a big difference maker on this Cleveland Browns defense. So I think we ride Myles Garrett off into the sunset. All right, Maxx Crosby, our number 2 defensive lineman for the week. Maxx Crosby finds himself in a very nice spot. Kind of a little bit one of those players that, at least for this year, has kind of depended a little bit more on those good matchups. But he's had a solid season overall. One of the higher producing defensive ends in the league. I imagine he's got to be up there in the top 10 to 15 defensive linemen for your fantasy football leagues. Of course, scoring dependent. But let's talk about the stats Maxx Crosby has coming into this week. Over the last 3 weeks, he's compiled 18 tackles, a sack, 6 tackles for loss, 5 quarterback hits, and a forced fumble. And this week he plays the LA Chargers, who are down some offensive linemen. So we're looking at a nice matchup here for Maxx Crosby and the Las Vegas edge rushers. Top 2 matchup for sack production given up over the last 3 weeks by the LA Chargers offensive line and or Justin Herbert as a result of missing some offensive linemen. They've been giving up 2.5 sacks to the defensive end position over the last 3 weeks on average. They've also given up a couple of pass deflections in that time too, so there's a little bit of opportunity for some big plays in terms of pass deflections, and also a lot of opportunity here for the pass rush opportunities for Maxx Crosby this week against the LA Chargers. There's also a nice modest floor of 9.67 tackles per game on the table coming into this matchup, but that's going to rank more of a mid matchup for tackle production. Maxx Crosby is one of these guys who I think it was just last week. He had 8 tackles in a game. He has a high floor of tackles week in and week out. He's no stranger to 90 tackles over the course of an entire season, which is outstanding for a defensive lineman. So he's going to be out there a majority of the snaps. I'm expecting a big week from Maxx Crosby this week against the Chargers. So let's talk about Will Anderson, another guy who's been on a tear over the last handful of weeks. Over the last 3 weeks specifically, he's got 12 tackles, 4.5 sacks, 5 tackles for loss, 5 quarterback hits, 2 pass deflections, 2 forced fumbles, and a fumble recovery. This week, he finds himself in a nice, favorable matchup against the Indianapolis Colts, who have been very generous to defensive linemen over the last handful of weeks. I think it was just last week, Daniel Jones, as of week 11? Daniel Jones had been sacked 15 times in the 3 prior weeks. And I know the Chiefs didn't land home Chiefs didn't land home on Indianapolis quite as often as what he had been giving up the last several weeks prior. But Houston's going to bring a lot stronger pass rush than Kansas City specifically. And we're still looking at plenty of opportunity on the table here for Will Anderson in this pass rush for Houston. 2.33 sacks per game on average given up by the Indianapolis offensive line. 2 defensive ends anyways over the last 3 weeks. And a nice modest 9 tackles per game also given up. They've also given up a couple of pass deflections in that time too, but not a whole lot to write home about there in terms of opportunity for pass deflections. It's limited opportunity, but the opportunity is still there. So we're looking at a top-end sack matchup for Will Anderson. Also a nice modest tackle floor, but he's not one of these guys who's going to go exceed expectations as it relates to tackles per game. But he can go off for a couple 2.5 sacks like he did just last week, and he's on a nice little streak here of consecutive games having grabbed a sack or more. So love Will Anderson. We'll love Will Anderson this week, and just a matter of fact, the entire Houston pass rush as well. You'll see down there at the bottom, Danielle Hunter finds himself in the top 12 as well. They've just been tearing offenses up. 6 sacks overall by this pass rush on Josh Allen last week, who hardly ever gets sacked. That's pretty impressive. So we're going to ride Will Anderson Jr. this week as our top 3 defensive linemen. So now let's talk TJ Watt at number 4. TJ Watt in this matchup this week against the Buffalo Bills, who just gave up those 6 sacks to the Houston pass rush, as I mentioned just a second ago. But TJ Watt over the last 3 weeks has 9 tackles, 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss, 5 quarterback hits, 3 pass deflections, and a forced fumble. So he's actually even getting back to the quarterback more than he's able to convert with those 5 quarterback hits, suggesting he is often behind the line of scrimmage, but maybe not able to land a sack quite as often as we're used to TJ Watt seeing as of late anyways, but that doesn't mean that there's not going to be opportunity in this game because this matchup against the Buffalo Bills kind of presents to be a decent one, especially after last week. But again, these numbers are going to be a little inflated just because Houston defied the odds and just absolutely crushed Josh Allen last week, but perhaps they exposed a weakness of this Buffalo Bills offensive line. So this matchup for the Pittsburgh Steelers actually ends up being a top 5 matchup for sack production on average given up over the last 3 weeks to defensive ends, where the Buffalo Bills have given up 2.17 sacks on average over the last 3 weeks to the position, and a nice modest 8.33 tackle floor, but it's going to be more of a middling matchup for tackle production. We're more targeting the sack opportunity here because Pittsburgh Steelers is just a notch below the Houston pass rush here, overall anyways. So I would say TJ Watt's probably got the higher upside of any of the pass rushers on both of those teams. But as far as a whole entire defensive line, probably looking at a more stout one with the Houston Texans. But Pittsburgh find themselves in a nice little opportunity here. Again, 2.17 sacks per game given up by the Buffalo Bills over the last 3 weeks. Again, that's going to be quite a bit inflated just because last week Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson combined for 4 sacks alone. But so just kind of take that into consideration. But TJ Watt ought to be just fine this week in week 13. So let's talk about Aidan Hutchinson and his matchup here on Thanksgiving. Aidan Hutchinson comes into week 13 having compiled 9 tackles, a sack and a half, 2 tackles for loss, 8 quarterback hits, and a pass deflection. Again, one of these guys whose numbers are suggesting he's back there putting pressure on the quarterback consistently with the 8 quarterback hits, just not able to convert as many as we'd like with just a sack and a half over the last 3 weeks. But we're looking at Not necessarily an outstanding matchup for offensive line production, but definitely a top 11 matchup for sacks given up by the Green Bay Packers to opposing defensive ends. 1.67 sacks per game given up to opposing defensive ends over the last 3 weeks on average by the Green Bay offensive line. We're now looking at a kind of a nice little combination of stats here where they're also giving up a modest 10.33 tackles per game on average to the position, also giving up 2 pass deflections in the last 3 weeks as well. So that tackle production is actually going to end up being top 5 matchup for defensive ends. So we're looking at a modest opportunity here for Aidan Hutchinson in Week 13, where Green Bay's given up some nice stats to the position over the last month or so. So I like Aidan Hutchinson this week. He's our number 5 defensive lineman for Week 13. So now let's talk Andrew Van Ginkel at number 6. Andrew Van Ginkel comes into Week 13 having compiled 17 tackles, a sack, 3 tackles for loss, 2 quarterback hits, and 3 pass deflections in the last 3 weeks. Now he's facing a Seattle Seahawks offensive line that's kind of been pretty stingy overall this season, but Andrew Van Ginkel manages to get it done one way or another. And so if we want to talk about the numbers, Seattle's given up 0.67 sacks per game, which ends up being a bottom 10 matchup for sack production and opportunity. But again, Andrew Van Ginkel gets it done. The man ends up getting a ton of tackles on running backs behind the line of scrimmage or a quarterback hit or something. He's able to add points to your IDP teams more than just landing sacks consistently. He's able to get some pass deflections. He's able to compile a number of tackles. He's a high tackle floor kind of guy, and he'll even force a fumble or something here and there as well. So Andrew Van Ginkel, albeit not a great matchup on paper, is just one of those consistent high floor players. He's going to produce for you week in and week out. You're not going to sit Andrew Van Ginkel regardless of the matchup. So start him with confidence this week. He will get it done and find a way. So let's talk Brian Burns. He drops to number 7 this week, kind of on a slow little stretch here where he's only compiled, 12 tackles, 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss, 6 quarterback hits, and 2 pass deflections over the last 3 weeks. I only say that's a down week, or that's a down little stretch here because Burns has been averaging almost a sack per game over the course of the entire season. But again, it's just suggesting 6 quarterback hits suggests that he's getting back there and able to convert just not quite as many of those quarterback hits and pressures that he's putting on the quarterback into as much sack production as he was early in the year. But this matchup for New England is an opportunistic one where we're looking at where are we at? On average over the last 3 weeks, it's not particularly a great matchup, but over the course of the entire season, this has actually been a pretty nice play where New England's been pretty vulnerable overall, especially against those more prominent pass rushers like Brian Burns. So this matchup specifically over the last 3 weeks, the numbers don't present a whole lot to go off of here. A decent 9.33 tackle floor, where they've given up almost, over 9 tackles per game to the defensive end position. Brian Burns is going to be a high tackle floor kind of player on your defensive line. So I think he's going to come in with a nice floor of tackles. The opportunity for sacks just might be a little tougher to get, but it's been at points during the season, New England has been a top-end matchup. So there is vulnerabilities here against a prominent pass rush. And these numbers could be based on maybe poorer matchups where New England possibly hasn't played quite as prominent of pass rushes over the last 3 weeks. So that's something to kind of bear in mind, too. If you want to get a gauge on that, go and check out the kind of pass rushes that New England has played over the last 3 weeks. That's kind of what I do to see just kind of what competition they've been playing. And maybe that can lend well to this numbers we're seeing. If it's a poor matchup and they haven't played a very great pass rush, you're going to have a little bit more success in stopping some sack production and stuff to those weaker pass rushes. So just kind of bear that stuff in mind. That's something to consider as to what competition they're playing with these numbers that we're looking at. So Brian Burns ought to be just fine this week. New England is a vulnerable offensive line, although the numbers might not suggest it. All right, let's talk Nik Bonitto at number 8. Nik Bonitto he truly is on a slow stretch after having a sack in pretty well almost every game so far this season. He's got 7 tackles, a sack and a half, 2 tackles for loss, 4 quarterback hits in the last 3 weeks. He plays the Washington Commanders this week, which again is a more the numbers don't suggest that this is a great matchup, but Nik Bonitto is due for a big game. He's a big play specialist, and he manages to find a way to land a sack regardless of the matchup statistics. But we're only looking at about a third of a sack over the last 3 weeks given up by the Washington Commanders. They haven't played too great of a pass rush over the last 3 weeks. I believe they played the Vikings or something. They played a decent matchup a couple of weeks ago, but overall, they just haven't had too much competition, and I think that this Washington Commanders team, although the numbers might not suggest a great matchup, might be a little bit more vulnerable than the numbers are showing here. So I have an inkling that Nik Bonitto and this Denver pass rush is going to be one of the more prominent pass rushes that Washington has faced over the entire season, as they're, a top 5 pass rush overall. So I think Denver is going to flip the script a little bit this week and maybe get a little bit more opportunity than the numbers might suggest here. So although it's not a particularly great matchup, it's kind of why we've got Nik Bonitto at the bottom end of this top 12, just to kind of add a little bit of a safe floor there. Just there's a little caution. The numbers haven't quite been there lately, but it doesn't mean it can't happen. This is one of the best pass rushes in the league, and if top end pass rush ends up having kind of a cold streak over the course of any point in the season, you can almost bank on a bounce back at some point, and then momentum kind of carries from there. So I think Nik Bonitto ought to be just fine this week against the Commanders. Now let's talk Jared Verse, part of this LA Rams pass rush, another top end pass rush in the league, where Jared Verse over the last 3 weeks has compiled eight tackles, 2 sacks, 2 tackles for loss, 3 quarterback hits, and a pass deflection in that time. He plays the Carolina Panthers, which doesn't end up suggesting a particularly tasty matchup, but it's a vulnerable one. Carolina's been up and down throughout the entire season. They've given up 0.67 sacks to the defensive end position over the last 3 weeks. Not a great tackle floor as well, where Carolina's kind of had to air it out. I anticipate that to be much of the same this week. So because the LA Rams are going to go up so early and often, I would imagine Carolina is going to be passing the ball a ton. So there should be plenty of opportunity for this LA Rams pass rush to get back to Bryce Young. Although they haven't had quite the last little stretch over the last month or so that they started out. Byron Young has kind of gone cold a little bit, but we're going to ride Jared Verse. He's still got 2 sacks in the last 3 weeks, so I think we can feel confident about Jared Verse at least remaining consistent over the stretch of a longer period versus week to week. He might be a little up and down, but that's kind of part of the position. So really, again, I mentioned before, it's really hard to maintain the kind of stats that Myles Garrett is over an entire season. So, typically, although they might even be in a good matchup, sometimes these guys are going to fall flat a little bit. But LA Rams have been pretty consistent for much of the season. I expect them to continue that against the Carolina Panthers this week. So I think Jared Verse, if anybody, should be able to get back to the quarterback. So let's talk Montez Sweat, a guy who is on a hot streak here over the last 3 weeks. He has compiled 8 tackles, 3.5 sacks, 4 tackles for loss, 5 quarterback hits, a pass deflection, and a forced fumble recovery. Plays the Philadelphia Eagles, and again, not an outstanding matchup for sack production given up, but I think the Chicago Bears offense is going to give Philadelphia a run for their money. This is projecting to be a nice competitive matchup, a lot of back and forth. Chicago's been on a tear. They've got a ton of wins. Philadelphia, being the former Super Bowl contender, Super Bowl winner, has kind of been up and down for much of the season. They've found themselves to be a little vulnerable at times, but they've also found themselves to kind of get their act together and put some numbers up on the board and find some wins somehow or another. But they've only given up, 1.17 sacks per game to the defensive end position, so we're not necessarily targeting a top-end matchup. We're more riding Montez Sweat and his hot streak here over the last 3 weeks. He's been doing solid while Chicago has had success over the last month or so. So I like Montez Sweat this week, albeit in a poor matchup. I think Chicago's pass rush is going to have to bring a little extra juice in order to affect the Philadelphia Eagles if they want to end up winning this matchup. But Philadelphia has lost to the New York Giants and some pretty poor teams over this entire season. So Chicago, I think, is going to be one of the better options to kind of upset this Philadelphia Eagles team. Even though they might not be quite Super Bowl contenders, they've had a lot of success, and I anticipate them to bring some unexpected plans for this Philadelphia offense in their game plan this week. So, although the numbers might not suggest a good matchup, I think Montez Sweat ought to be just fine this week. He should be in your lineups week in and week out at this point. So let's talk Danielle Hunter. Danielle Hunter, our number 11 defensive lineman, comes in with 17 tackles, 7 sacks, 7 tackles for loss, 10 quarterback hits, and 1 forced fumble. He has been absolutely hot over the last month or so. Playing the Indianapolis Colts, again, as I was mentioning earlier, with the matchup for Will Anderson Jr. This ends up being our top 4 matchup for sack production, where the Indianapolis Colts, again, have been giving up 2.33 tackles per game to the defensive end position, also giving up 0.67 pass deflections and 9 tackles per game in that time as well. So we're looking at a nice, modest matchup with plenty of opportunity here for Houston to land some sacks on Daniel Jones. And that Indianapolis Colts line has been pretty vulnerable over the last month or so. So this matchup for the Houston pass rush is a nice opportunistic one. Now let's talk Tuli Tuipulotu. The LA Chargers defensive end plays the Las Vegas Raiders this week. Tui has comes into this week having collected 6 tackles, 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss, 2 quarterback hits, and a forced fumble over the last 3 weeks. And playing against this Las Vegas offensive line is just an outstanding matchup. It actually ends up being a top matchup for defensive and sack production, where the Las Vegas Raiders are giving up almost 3 sacks per game, 2.67 sacks per game given up to the defensive end position over the last 3 weeks, to go with the top end tackle production opportunity as well for this week, where the Vegas Raiders are giving up a top 2 amount of tackles to the defensive end position, 12 tackles per game on average given up to the position over the last 3 weeks. Again, that's a top 2 matchup for tackle production and a top number 1 matchup for sack production to the defensive end position. Not a whole lot in the way of pass deflections, where Vegas has only given up a third of a pass deflection per game, so only 1 pass deflection given up in the last 3 weeks. But there's modest opportunity in the sack column and a lot of floor play here for tackles as well. 2.67 sacks and 12 tackles per game on average given up to the position. So Tui and this Chargers pass rush find themselves in a nice opportunity against a very weak Las Vegas Raiders offensive line. All right, that's going to wrap up the defensive linemen. Let's run through them one more time. Myles Garrett, Maxx Crosby, Will Anderson Jr., TJ Watt, Aidan Hutchinson, Andrew Van Ginkel, Brian Burns, Nik Bonitto, Jared Verse, Montez Sweat, Danielle Hunter, and Tuli Tuipulotu. Now let's get into the linebacker position, the position everybody loves the most. It's the most fun position for me as well. We've got top 12 linebackers being Roquan Smith, Foyesade Oluokun, Blake Cashman, Jordyn Brooks, Jack Campbell, Robert Spillane, Kaden Elliss, Zach Bond, Cedric Gray, Jamien Sherwood, Barrett Carter, and Bobby Okereke to round out the top 12. Sorry, y'all, got to get my juice. All right, so let's get back to it. Go up to the top of this list and talk about Roquan Smith against the Cincinnati Bengals this week. Roquan has 21 tackles, a quarterback hit, and 2 pass deflections over the last 3 weeks. And we're looking at a nice matchup here for tackle production to the linebacker position. Let's see. Take that back. I'm a liar. It's a bottom end matchup for tackle production, but Roquan Smith kind of he's one of those players that defies the odds. So we're looking at bottom 10 matchup for Baltimore Ravens tackle production, where the Cincinnati Bengals are giving up 15 tackles per game on average over the last 3 weeks. But we're also talking about a matchup that's been where numbers have been based on Joe Flacco. The Cincinnati offense is going to be a little bit more dynamic with Joe Burrow under center, and it is confirmed that he's going to play on Thanksgiving. He is back and in action, so I anticipate this to kind of fall a little bit more in line with Joe Burrow's numbers, where Cincinnati's going to be a little bit, again, as I mentioned, a little bit more dynamic, have a little bit more flexibility with the kind of schemes and plays that they can run on offense. So, albeit not a great production on paper, this divisional matchup projects to be a competitive one, and I expect these teams to go back and forth. Baltimore defense is pretty vulnerable. They're going to allow Cincinnati to score and stay in this game, so I anticipate Lamar going to have to get his head out of his rear and put up some big numbers to keep up with the Cincinnati Bengals offense with Joe Burrow under center. I think they're missing T. Higgins this week, but they got Jamar Chase back. They don't need a whole lot more than that to get things done. So think this matchup for Roquan Smith, albeit not an outstanding one on paper, with Joe Burrow under center, I think we're looking at a much more competitive matchup and should be a pretty back and forth affair. I like the position that Roquan Smith is going to find himself in this week. So now let's talk about Foyesade Oluokun against the Tennessee Titans this week. He comes into Week 13 having compiled 24 tackles, a tackle for loss, and 3 pass deflections over the last 3 weeks. And this matchup against the Tennessee Titans, again, not really projecting to be a tasty one on paper. Where let's see. Well, if I can get my stuff straight here. Yeah, it's a bottom 10 matchup for tackle production to the defensive end position, just a hair above Roquan's matchup. But Tennessee's given up the same numbers, 15 tackles per game to the linebacker position. But there's a little opportunity here for some blitzing and some pass rush opportunities where Tennessee's given up 0.67 sacks per game to the linebacker position, also given up one pass deflection per game over the last 3 weeks on average to the linebacker position as well. Foyesade Oluokun is no stranger to getting pass deflections in coverage. I think he ought to have ample opportunity for some big plays here, and albeit the numbers might not suggest a high floor of tackles, he's the lone full-time linebacker, so I expect him to soak up much of these 15 tackles and perhaps give this team a nice boost to those numbers after this week is done. So Tennessee's been pretty vulnerable. Jacksonville has been kind of up and down for much of the season. On offense, I think this ought to be a competitive matchup. It's a divisional matchup, which means that both of these teams kind of know each other a little bit extra, more than your average team is going to be because they play each other a couple of times a year. So I think Jacksonville's going to have a game plan. Tennessee's going to have a game plan. This ought to be a little bit more back and forth than Tennessee typically has throughout the season. So Roquan Smith or Foyesade Oluokun, you're not going to sit him for any inconsistent players or really anybody else. It doesn't matter the matchup. You're going to start him week in and week out. So start Foyesade with confidence. He's been almost averaging 10 tackles per game over the entire season. Doesn't matter the matchup. So let's talk Blake Cashman at number 3. He has been on a tear over the last few weeks, where he's compiled 42 tackles in that time. Hasn't had much production in any other statistical category, but 42 tackles is 12 tackles per game, 13 tackles per game. That's pretty modest. 14 tackles per game, actually. That's insane. So Blake Cashman has been a tackle monster over the last 3 weeks, and this matchup against the Seattle Seahawks doesn't suggest to be a particularly outstanding matchup for tackle production, where Seattle's only given up 11.67 tackles per game on average to the linebacker position. But Seattle also has kind of had some easier matchups of late. They play Minnesota. Minnesota's pass rush ought to be competitive. The only caveat being that offense in Minnesota, are they going to be able to keep up with Seattle? But perhaps this is going to suggest that maybe Seattle gets up early and runs the ball a little extra. But Minnesota's not going to go down without a fight. That defense is outstanding and manages to keep this team in games. But if anything, I think we're going to look at a little bit different matchup than what the numbers might suggest. Blake Cashman has been on a tear. Again, it doesn't matter what matchup we're looking at. He's one of those guys that's going to overproduce week in and week out. So the numbers might not suggest a great matchup. We're still in a good spot here against Seattle. I think the numbers are going to end up being wrong in this one. Again, he's the only about full-time linebacker. I think Eric Wilson ends up coming off the edge more often than not, and he's more involved in the pass rush, but Blake Cashman is soaking up all the tackles in the middle of the field. So I think he garners much, if not exceeds, this 11.67 tackles per game to the linebacker position all by himself. So Blake Cashman is a high upside player. You're going to start him week in and week out. So let's talk Jordyn Brooks and his matchup here. Jordyn Brooks comes in as our number 4 linebacker for week 13. He's got 40 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a forced fumble over the last 3 weeks, playing the New Orleans Saints, who are down a running back. I think Alvin Kamara is likely to miss this week, but that running back position has kind of been one of their go-tos for much of the season, where they just haven't had a whole lot of consistent play out of their quarterback position. But let's see, for tackle production given up over the last 3 weeks, again, not a particularly tasty one. New Orleans Saints haven't been a successful offense, but Jordyn Brooks has been just completely going bonkers all year. Again, it doesn't matter the matchup for these top end producers. Jordyn Brooks is, if he's not leading the league, he is a top 5 tackle producer over the whole season among his peers at the linebacker position. So I expect Jordyn Brooks to continue doing what he has been doing and manage to find a way to compile some tackles, if any, behind the line of scrimmage, maybe get some pass deflections against a vulnerable young quarterback for New Orleans. So I think you start Jordyn Brooks with confidence. You're not going to sit him any given week. He's going to be one of your top averagers at the linebacker position for fantasy production. So let's talk Jack Campbell at number 5. Jack Campbell comes into this week having compiled 35 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a quarterback hit over the last 3 weeks, playing the Green Bay Packers, which ends up being a, let's see. I don't know why I can't find my matchups here. But anyways, looking at a top 14 matchup for tackle production, Green Bay's been a lot more generous than some of these other matchups so far. Green Bay's given up 17.67 tackles per game to the linebacker position, and Jack Campbell being the sole linebacker in the middle of that defense soaking up tackles. Anzalon's got a low tackle floor. He's more of a pure NFL player that the Detroit Lions seem to want to hang on to for whatever reason. But he's no tackle specialist like Jack Campbell here. There's also some opportunity for big plays where Green Bay's given up a sack over the last 3 weeks. They've given up a pass deflection as well to the linebacker position. But it's not a whole lot of opportunity in the way of big plays, but a 17.67 tackle floor on average to the linebacker position is going to be kind of what we're targeting here for Jack Campbell. He's got a nice matchup against Green Bay. So Jack Campbell's been a nice producer much of the season. I expect him to continue that against Green Bay, who tends to lean on the run, especially given some of the injuries they've had on offense. So now let's get into our number 6 linebacker in Robert Spillane. Robert Spillane comes into this week having compiled 23 tackles, a tackle for loss, and 2 pass deflections over the last 3 weeks. He draws a matchup against the New York Giants, which ends up being a top 3 matchup for tackle production. The Giants have given up 20.33 tackles per game to the linebacker position over the last 3 weeks. Now, mind you, these numbers are based on Jameis Winston starting at quarterback, so things might change a little bit, but nonetheless, New York Giants have given up modest tackle production to the linebacker position, and even though you might just consider that linebacker tackles are more suggestive of a run-heavy offense, so Devin Singletary and Tyrone Tracy have been getting the ball enough to allow production to opposing linebackers in that time, not necessarily quarterback numbers. So, but things are going to change when you have a new quarterback in there. The game flow is different. The scheme is different. So just going to consider that when you're taking a look at these numbers here. So, again, top 3 matchup for tackle production for Robert Spillane coming into this week. I think he's got ample opportunity and maybe even some more opportunity in the pass defense game as well, where Jackson Dart's probably going to be pretty careless as a young quarterback, kind of be more vulnerable to making mistakes. So perhaps there's a little bit of extra opportunity there for Robert Spillane this week. I like the spot he's in. So now let's talk Kaden Elliss and his matchup this week against New York Jets. He's our number 7 linebacker. He comes in with 20 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 3 quarterback hits, a pass deflection, and 2 sacks over the last 3 weeks. Kaden Elliss is a nice high floor tackler who's also involved heavily in the blitz packages for Atlanta. And this matchup against the New York Jets suggests to be a modest one, top 10 matchup for tackle production, where the Jets are giving up 18 tackles per game on average to the linebacker position over the last 3 weeks. With Tyrod Taylor in there at quarterback, I think these numbers are only going to grab about 1 game of him under center, but I believe he's going to be in there again, and a more stable quarterback is going to suggest a little bit more consistency out of this offense and more opportunity for tackle production, because they're going to be able to push the ball downfield, get in scoring position, and kind of keep up with this Atlanta Falcons offense. So this matchup for the Atlanta Falcons defense, especially the linebackers, I think is going to be a nice one. And Kaden Elliss has been a high-end producer much of the season. So a couple of good player with a good matchup, and we're looking at a nice spot here for Kaden Elliss. So let's talk Zack Baun, number 8 linebacker this week. Zack Baun comes into Week 13 having compiled 24 tackles, a tackle for loss, a pass deflection, and a forced fumble in the last 3 weeks. He's got a matchup against the Chicago Bears. Chicago presents a middling matchup where they're giving up about 16 tackles per game to the linebacker position. But again, even though it's a bottom, 11, 12, not even quite. It's a bottom 15 matchup for tackle production. Zach Bond's been a guy who's found a way to get it done. He should be a top 10 to 15 linebacker in just about any league where he's able to get it done in the pass defense game. He's able to get it done in coverage, in the pass rush. He's landed sacks, tackles behind the line of scrimmage. I think Zach Bond, albeit not the top end matchup, we're still looking at him being in a nice spot to continue his play that he has for much of the season. So I think Zach Bond ought to be just fine this week in a matchup against the Chicago Bears. All right, now let's talk Cedric Gray, our number 9 linebacker for the week. Playing the Jacksonville Jaguars, he's got 34 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, a quarterback hit, 2 pass deflections, and a fumble recovery in the last 3 weeks in this matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Isn't quite a top-end matchup. We've got a lot of stuff against the grain this week, apparently. So, but it's a divisional matchup, as I mentioned before, where these teams are going to go back and forth. Jacksonville, there might even be potential for Jacksonville to go up, and if they do, that only lends well to tackle production for Tennessee linebackers, and Cedric Gray has been the lone tackle specialist there for Tennessee. Cody Barton hasn't been quite what he has been over the last few years. So Cedric Gray has come on strong this season, even though Jacksonville's only given up 13 tackles per game to the linebacker position over the last 3 weeks on average. There's some opportunity for pass deflections in coverage, where they've given up a pass deflection per game to the position, also given up an interception to the position over the last 3 weeks as well. I think Cedric Gray should comfortably continue his streak of high-end production that he's garnered much of this season. So don't feel like Cedric Gray's in a bad spot this week, although the numbers might suggest a poor matchup. We're still looking at a high-end producer, so Cedric Gray, start him with confidence week in and week out. Now let's talk Jamien Sherwood, number 10 linebacker this week. Jamien Sherwood comes into week 13 having compiled 27 tackles and a pass deflection over the last 3 weeks, playing an Atlanta Falcons team who ends up being a top 7 matchup, for tackle production to the linebacker position, and Jamien Sherwood is a tackle artist. Atlanta's given up 18.67 tackles per game on average to the linebacker position. They've also given up 2 sacks to the position as well over the last 3 weeks, and a pass deflection on average to the position as well. So there's plenty of opportunity for big plays here in coverage, in the pass rush game as well. And Jamien Sherwood is no stranger to being involved in plays behind the line of scrimmage, but we're also looking at a nice high tackle floor, 18.67 tackles given up to the position by the Atlanta Falcons over the last 3 weeks, and Kirk Cousins and this offense for Atlanta have been struggling. They're missing some key playmakers. I expect them to lean on Bijan Robinson heavily, and that's probably lending well to much of this production given up. So, again, looking at a nice high tackle floor for Jamien Sherwood in Week 13. Now let's talk Barrett Carter. He finds himself in the top 12 this week. He's got a matchup against the Baltimore Ravens. Coming into this week, having about 30 tackles and a pass deflection over the last 3 weeks, Barrett Carter finds himself in a nice spot against the Baltimore Ravens, a top 11 matchup for tackle production to the linebacker position. Baltimore's given up 18 tackles per game to the position over the last 3 weeks. They've also given up 2 interceptions over the last 3 weeks as well to linebackers, 2 pass deflections as well in that time too. So we're looking at some opportunity in coverage as well for Barrett Carter to finally get out of that tackle category. He's been a tackle monster since he took over that full-time role for Cincinnati, but maybe he can get his hands on some big play opportunities this week and add some extra points for us. But nonetheless, I expect that high tackle floor to remain intact and him to garner up much of these 18 tackles on the table by the Baltimore offense. He's going to be soaking up a lot of those Derrick Henry rushes, and Baltimore loves to run the ball. So I'm expecting a big matchup for both sides of the ball in this divisional matchup between the Baltimore Ravens and the Cincinnati Bengals, and I think Barrett Carter is going to be one of those reaping the benefits. Now let's talk Bobby Okereke to round out the top 12. The New York Giants linebacker is playing the New England Patriots this week. He's got 21 tackles and a pass deflection over the last 3 weeks, and this New England Patriots matchup is presenting to be A modest one, top 8 matchup for tackle production. New England's given up 18.33 tackles per game to the position, with TreVeyon Henderson in the backfield there now, kind of manning the backfield for New England. There's been plenty of opportunity for opposing linebackers to soak up production. Bobby Okereke is one of these guys who's going to get a nice high floor of tackles, and once in a while he's going to pop for some big plays, but more or less we're kind of targeting this high floor for tackles, and he is the lone full-time linebacker there in New York who's going to be consistently in the middle of the field, just waiting for TreVeyon Henderson and this New England offense to just to kind of make things happen, and he's going to be there to make plays. So 18.33 tackles per game given up to the position. Bobby Okereke being kind of a 7 to 8 tackle floor kind of guy. I expect him to have a nice week in terms of floor play against the New England Patriots. So now let's round out the top 12 linebackers. That's going to do it for the linebacker position. At 1, we've got Roquan Smith, Foyesade Oluokun, Blake Cashman, Jordyn Brooks, Jack Campbell, Robert Spillane, Kaden Elliss, Zach Bond, Cedric Gray, Jamien Sherwood, Barrett Carter, and Bobby Okereke to round out the top 12 linebackers for Week 13. Now let's get into the defensive back position. Talk about our top 13 or our top 12 rankings for Week 13. We've got from 1 to 12, Tykee Smith, Talanoa Hufanga, Kamren Curl, Brian Branch, Nik Cross, Kemari Lassiter, Chamarri Conner, DaRon Bland, Budda Baker, Justin Reed, Derwin James, and Cole Bishop to round out the top 12. Now let's jump back up to the top and talk a little bit about Tykee Smith, who has been a revelation over the last couple of years. Tampa Bay safety comes into this matchup having compiled 19 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 2 quarterback hits, an interception, and 4 pass deflections in coverage. And he's got a nice matchup here against the Arizona Cardinals, where the Cardinals, let me get to my right stats here. Safety tackles. The Cardinals have given up a top 2 amount of tackles to the safety position over the last 3 weeks. They've given up 18.33 tackles per game to the safety position over the last 3 weeks. We've also got a lot of opportunity for big plays. They've given up a half sack per game to the safety position in that time as well. They've given up 3 pass deflections on average per game to the safety position, and given up an interception in that time as well. So Arizona's going to bring a lot of juice. They're going to be competitive. Jacoby Brissett has done pretty well for this Arizona offense, and it's lent well to a lot of production at the safety position. So Tykee Smith being a high-end producer, high floor, high ceiling player, he's just got it all. Finds himself in an outstanding matchup this week. I think we play him with confidence week in and week out. Now let's talk Talanoa Hufanga in his matchup this week against the Washington Commanders. He's got 24 tackles, a sack, a tackle for loss, a quarterback hit, and 3 pass deflections over the last 3 weeks. And this matchup against the Washington Commanders is a nice and modest one, where the Washington Commanders are giving up a top 7 amount of tackles to the safety position over the last 3 weeks. 16.33 tackles per game given up to the position on average. We're looking at a nice high tackle floor for Hufanga, who's no stranger to 6 to 8 plus tackle games. Then also Washington is kind of vulnerable and susceptible to big plays as well. They are also giving up a half sack per game to the safety position. So maybe there's some opportunity for Hufanga to get some plays behind the line of scrimmage, perhaps get a quarterback hit, tackle for loss, maybe even a pass deflection or something as he's kind of rushing the passer. And I think Marcus Mariota is going to be starting for one more week before we hear or see anything out of Jayden Daniels. So top-end matchup for tackle production, 16.33 tackles and a half sack per game given up by this Washington offense to the safety position over the last 3 weeks. Hufanga finds himself in a nice opportunistic spot this week. Now let's talk Kamren Curl, number three defensive back on the week. Cam Curl comes into this week having compiled 26 tackles over the last 3 weeks, and he draws a matchup against the Carolina Panthers, which presents a middling matchup for tackle production. The Panthers have given up 15 tackles per game to the safety position over the last 3 weeks, but there's some opportunity for big plays. They've given up 2 sacks in the last 3 weeks to go with 2 interceptions to the safety position. And Cam Curl's no stranger to getting an interception or a sack behind the line of scrimmage. Usually, I think the plays behind the line of scrimmage would be more Quentin Lake's bread and butter, but perhaps they end up getting Kamren Curl a little bit more involved in those blitz packages with Quentin Lake now sidelined for much of the rest of the season. So Cam Curl coming in as a high floor tackler, I think he's going to continue that production, and now we've also got some opportunity for big plays here as well. 15 tackles per game, 0.67 sacks per game, and 0.67 interceptions on the table coming into this matchup. Cam Curl finds himself in a nice spot in week 13. All right, let's talk Brian Branch, our number 4 defensive back for the week. Brian Branch comes into week 13 having compiled 20 tackles, a sack and a half, a tackle for loss, 3 quarterback hits, and a pass deflection over the last 3 weeks. This matchup against the Green Bay Packers is going to present a middling matchup for tackle production to the safety position, but Brian Branch, again, is one of these guys who's going to regularly outperform expectations, and he's been pretty hot the last several weeks. I expect that production to continue, with Green Bay having given up 13.33 tackles per game to the safety position on average over the last 3 weeks. This divisional matchup ought to be a lot of back and forth. Detroit's going to need to bring some juice out of the they're going to need to bring some extra juice in the tank this week against Green Bay and switch things up. I anticipate Brian Branch to kind of be in on some of those clever plays to kind of disrupt the Green Bay offense. So Brian Branch, albeit not a top-end matchup, we're more looking at a modest middling matchup for tackle production and floor play here, but one of those guys, again, who's going to outperform expectations regularly, especially on the hot streak he's got. You're not going to say Brian Branch. All right, let's talk Nik Cross, our number 5 defensive back for week 13. Nik Cross comes into week 13 off a bye week, having some extra rest. But in his last 3 weeks, he's compiled 21 tackles, 3 quarterback hits, and a sack in that time. And he finds himself in a matchup against the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans have given up, 14.33 tackles per game to the safety position over the last 3 weeks. This is a divisional matchup. There should be a lot of back and forth. It should be a competitive one. There's going to be ample opportunity in these divisional matchups for defensive back production. So I think Nik Cross, being a high floor tackler, no stranger to 7 to 9 tackles or so most weeks, is going to garner up most of these 14.33 tackles that are on the table coming into this matchup. The Houston Texans have also given up a sack to the position. They've also given up over a pass deflection per game to the safety position, so perhaps there's some opportunity for plays behind the line of scrimmage, get a tackle for loss, more quarterback hits. He's no stranger to, 3 quarterback hits in the last 3 weeks. There's some big play opportunity and some potential for plays behind the line of scrimmage to get us those extra points for IDP. So play Nik Cross week in and week out, starting with confidence. All right, let's talk Kemari Lassiter. He makes his way to the top 12 again. He's kind of been one of my favorite cornerbacks to stream, a high consistent producer, even playing out wide at the cornerback position. He's got 9 tackles, two tackles for less than 3 pass deflections over the last 3 weeks. Been a little bit more of a matchup dependent kind of cornerback, but he also often finds himself in some pretty nice opportunities, and Indianapolis, being a high-volume passing offense, is going to lend well to cornerback production. So, namely, 16.33 tackles per game given up to cornerbacks by the Indianapolis offense on average over the last 3 weeks. Indianapolis has been just bleeding production to the cornerback position, and Kemari Lassiter has been one of those guys who just kind of often takes advantage of those nice matchups. I've had him here in the top 12, and he's been kind of nice to us for much of the season. So there's also opportunity for big plays where Indianapolis has given up 3.33 pass deflections per game as well to the position. Kemari Lassiter has been getting his hands on footballs all year, so he's been a guy who's compiled a number of pass deflections over the course of the season. I think this is going to present some opportunity in coverage, and to compare with a nice high tackle floor as well coming into this matchup. So Houston cornerbacks and safeties alike are going to be in a nice spot for some tackle production. So I like Kemari Lassiter this week. Now let's talk Chamarri Conner, our number 7 defensive back for week 13. Kansas City strong safety plays the Dallas Cowboys this week on Thanksgiving. 15 tackles per game, 2 tackles for loss, a quarterback hit, a sack, and a pass deflection over the last 3 weeks. And this matchup against the Dallas Cowboys presents a nice one for tackle production to the safety position, where the Dallas Cowboys have given up an 8th most 15 16.67 tackles per game to the safety position over the last 3 weeks on average. Not a whole lot in the way of big plays, just 2 pass deflections and 1 interception given up to the position over the last 3 weeks, but they're going to air it out a ton, and Chamarri Conner playing around the line of scrimmage and being one of those kind of nose for the football type of players, I think ought to be in a nice spot against Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys this week. We're looking at a nice matchup for Chamarri Conner. Now let's talk DaRon Bland on the flip side of that coin. DaRon Bland for the Dallas Cowboys, their slot cornerback, recently moved to the slot and garnered a lot of production in that spot. Playing the Kansas City Chiefs, he's got 27 tackles and 4 pass deflections over the last 3 weeks, able to get it done in coverage. And see what we're looking at for tackle production to the cornerback position. It's kind of a middling matchup. Kansas City hasn't been too vulnerable to the cornerback position over the last 3 weeks. They've kind of leaned a little bit more on the run, but they're going to have to air it out to keep up with the Dallas Cowboys. The Kansas City has given up, they've given up 12.33 tackles per game to cornerbacks over the last 3 weeks. They've given up three sacks over the last 3 weeks as well. But much of that is kind of skewed by Jaquan McMillan having compiled a couple of sacks alone a couple of weeks ago against Denver. But nonetheless, there's some opportunity for big plays in this matchup against Kansas City. Patrick Mahomes has given up 2 pass deflections per game to the position and 2 interceptions to the 2 cornerbacks. So there's some opportunity in coverage for DaRon Bland to perhaps get an interception. He's one of those guys that if he grabs one, he can take it to the house. So there's some big play opportunity there. Perhaps he gets involved behind the line of scrimmage. He's a slot corner, so he plays around the line of scrimmage in that box area that we like for slot corners and defensive backs in general. So I think Kansas City, again, as I mentioned, they're going to have to air it out and pass the ball a ton in order to keep up with the Dallas Cowboys, because Cowboys are going to be one of the top scoring offenses year in and year out. They have been for a number of years now. So they're high-powered. They're going to keep Kansas City on their toes. And so I think this is going to be a lot of back and forth, and Kansas City is going to have to pass the ball a ton, which is going to lend well to some big play production in coverage for DaRon Bland. And he ought to be guarding Xavier Worthy, one of their more he gets targeted a fair amount here. So I think Bland's going to have a nice high tackle floor this week and maybe even get his hands on a better ball or two. All right, let's talk Budda Baker. Budda Baker finally found himself in the top 12 this week. He's playing a lot more snaps around the line of scrimmage. It's kind of been up and down. He's played a lot in the box, and then depending on scheme and game plan, he might be falling back and playing a little bit deep. But lately, it's been more of the former, where he's played a lot of heavy box snaps over the last handful of weeks. But he's got a matchup against Tampa Bay, which presents a lucrative matchup for safety production. He's got 20 tackles, a quarterback hit, a half sack, an interception, and a pass deflection over the last 3 weeks. This matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is looking to be a top 6 matchup for tackle production given up by the Tampa Bay offense to the safety position. Tampa Bay's given up 16.67 tackles per game to the safety position, which is, again, I mentioned is a top 6 matchup for tackle production. They've also given up a modest 2.33 pass deflections per game in the last 3 weeks on average to the safety position, so there's some opportunity in coverage too. Baker Mayfield likes to take chances, and sometimes opposing defensive backs are able to get the hands on maybe a shot that he likes to take or a risk that he likes to take in the passing game. So there should be opportunity in coverage for some big plays, but Budda Baker's going to carry a nice high tackle floor anyways. You can pretty well bank on about 6 to 8 tackles per game either way. So couple that with a nice tackling matchup, and we're looking at a nice spot for Budda Baker. Now let's talk Justin Reid, New Orleans Saints strong safety, playing the Miami Dolphins this week. He's got 25 tackles, an interception for a touchdown, and 2 pass deflections in the last 3 weeks. And this matchup against the Miami Dolphins is suggesting to be a top 5 matchup for tackle production to the safety position, where Miami's given up 17 tackles per game to the safety position over the last 3 weeks. There's some opportunity as well for big plays in coverage. They've given up just 1 pass deflection per game to the position, but they've given up 2 interceptions over the last 3 weeks. Tua Tagovailoa is a susceptible quarterback and is known for making mistakes. He's no stranger to throwing multiple picks in in any given game. New Orleans defense is a competitive one, and they're going to be looking to smack them in the mouth and kind of give them some pushback and keep this game competitive. So I think Justin Reid's going to be a big proponent of that and perhaps take advantage of this 17 tackles per game and some big play opportunities in coverage. So like Justin Reid this week against the Miami Dolphins, I think he finds himself in a nice spot. All right, now let's talk Derwin James and his matchup this week. Derwin James against the Vegas Raiders. He's got 16 tackles, a quarterback hit, and a pass deflection in coverage over the last 3 weeks. This matchup against Vegas is not particularly a great one, but the Chargers, being down some offensive linemen, I think are going to let Vegas stay in this game and be a little bit more competitive, where the Vegas... I think it was just last week they got shut down pretty much completely by the Jacksonville Jaguars. So that's suggesting to me that they're not as high-powered as far as the Chargers offense as they have been for much of the season. And I think Vegas is not great overall, but I think they're going to be they're going to end up being a little bit more competitive than maybe what the Chargers would typically allow had they been at full force. So just kind of keep an eye also on the Chargers. Omarion Hampton might be back this week. I know he's practicing in limited fashion at this point in the week anyways, but just kind of keep an eye on that. That might help this offense have a little bit more juice. But either way, I think this is going to be a more competitive one than what the numbers might suggest, where Vegas has only given up 11 tackles to the safety position over the last 3 weeks on average. They've given up a sack as well in the last 3 weeks, 2 pass deflections, and an interception to the position. So although the numbers might not suggest a good matchup, Derwin James is a high floor player, able to get behind the line of scrimmage and make some tackles for loss, maybe a quarterback hit, get some pass deflections. He's able to kind of outproduce the expectations week in and week out. And I think this matchup, as I mentioned before, is going to be a little bit more competitive than what we might typically expect from the Chargers offense. I bet they let the Vegas Raiders kind of stay in this one. So I think that's going to lend well, especially being a divisional matchup. They kind of know each other like the back of their hands. I think Vegas is going to bring some tricks up their sleeve this week and stay competitive against the Chargers in their moment of vulnerability. So, Derwin James, although the numbers might not suggest a good matchup, I think he's going to defy the odds this week and end up being a nice producer for you. Now let's talk Cole Bishop, the number 12 defensive back for the week. So he's the strong safety for the Buffalo Bills. He's been pretty hot the last several weeks with 20 tackles, 2 interceptions, and 2 pass deflections over the last 3 weeks, playing the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittsburgh Steelers present a middling matchup for tackle production given up to the safety position. They are giving up 14.67 tackles per game to the safety position on average over the last 3 weeks. They've also given up 2 pass deflections and an interception in that time as well. So this is kind of a little bit of a combination of a modest matchup and a hot producer, where Cole Bishop has been kind of tearing it up lately and been able to produce some consistent numbers over the last month or so. So I'm not entirely sure. I haven't looked too much into his usage, but nonetheless, the production has been coming plentifully over the last month or so for Cole Bishop, and I expect this to be a nice back and forth matchup between Pittsburgh and Buffalo. So I think Cole Bishop ought to be in a good spot here to continue this hot streak, and we've got enough production on the table for him to kind of go out and exceed expectations. Nothing over the top in terms of production allowed to the position, but over the last month or so, Cole Bishop has been a nice player, and I believe he will find a way to get it done for our IDP teams. So let's round out the top 12 defensive backs again. From 1 to 12, we've got Tykee Smith, Talanoa Hufanga, Kamren Curl, Brian Branch, Nik Cross, Kemari Lassiter, Chamarri Conner, DaRon Bland, Budda Baker, Justin Reid, Derwin James, and Cole Bishop to make up the top 12 defensive backs for Week 13. So that's going to do it for the top 12 rankings at each of the IDP positions for defensive line, linebackers, and defensive backs. Thank you guys for tuning in each and every week. And again, let me know in the comments if you have any questions or anything that you want to talk through, any roster decisions you might be making this week. Let's talk it out. Again, I go into great detail and kind of elaborate on my thoughts pertaining to your situation and your question. So if you want an outside opinion, feel free to throw it there or reach out to me on Twitter at AxmanIDP. My DMs are always open. So now we're in we're at Thanksgiving. This is early morning of Thanksgiving. let's have a little fun. Throw it in the comments. What's your favorite Thanksgiving food? I'm a big proponent of some good old mashed potatoes and gravy. I like some oyster stuffing. That's some of my favorite side foods for Thanksgiving. Let me know what you guys like. Do you like the pumpkin pies? Do you like the turkey? What's your favorite Thanksgiving food? Let's hear it in the comments. So otherwise, everybody have a good happy holiday. Have a good weekend and good luck out there. We'll see you back next week for week 14 rankings as we approach the final week of the fantasy football regular season before we get to the playoffs. So good luck this week, and we'll see you back next week.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.